Hello there and welcome to So Sleepy. In today's episode, I have a wonderful story to share with you, one that I think you're really going to enjoy, especially if you love audiobooks and bedtime stories. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what book you'd like to hear next. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Mark, and if you enjoy my podcast and my voice, you can support me on Patreon. There you'll get access to hundreds of episodes, including exclusive books that I can't share anywhere else. It's totally free, and you'll receive 2 new readings every week, along with many other perks. You can check it out at patreon.com/sleepy. There's also a link in the description. It's the best place to listen and support me in bringing you these readings. Before we dive in, please drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, let's tuck you in and get started. The story of Shiva, the destroyer, the eternal ascetic, before the stars blinked into existence, before the rivers carved their paths through the earth, and before time itself began to tick, there was Shiva, perched high on the icy slopes of Mount Kailasa. He wasn't born like you or me, with a cry and a cradle. No, Shiva just was, a presence, a force, eternal and unshakable, like the mountain he called home. His skin was dusted with ash, not out of neglect, but as a badge of his detachment, a reminder that the body was just a fleeting vessel. His hair, matted and wild, coiled high on his head, tangled with the crescent moon that glowed faintly against the dark strands, casting a soft silver light. A serpent, sleek and silent, curled around his neck, not as a threat, but as a companion, its eyes glinting with secrets only Shiva understood. In his hands he held a trident, its 3 prongs sharp enough to pierce the fabric of reality itself. His eyes, half closed in meditation, seemed to see beyond the world, into the heart of the cosmos, where creation and destruction danced in an endless waltz. This was Shiva, the destroyer, one of the 3 pillars of existence alongside Brahma, who spun worlds from his dreams, and Vishnu, who cradled them in his care. But Shiva, he was the one who cleared the stage when the show was over, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity, making way for new acts to begin. Kailasa wasn't just any mountain, it was a fortress of solitude, its peaks piercing the heavens, cloaked in snow that never melted, even when the sun blazed. The air was thin, sharp and cold, biting at anyone foolish enough to climb without purpose. But for Shiva, it was perfect. He sat cross-legged on a tiger skin, its stripes faded from years of use, spread out on a rocky ledge overlooking a vast sea of clouds. The wind howled around him, but he didn't flinch. His body was still, like a statue carved from the mountain itself, yet there was a hum to his presence, a quiet energy that pulsed like the heartbeat of the universe. Sages, those wise old souls with beards long enough to trip over, would trek up the perilous paths just to catch a glimpse of him. They'd sit at a respectful distance, their breath fogging in the chill, hoping for a word, a glance, anything from the god who seemed to exist outside of time. But Shiva rarely spoke. His silence was his sermon, teaching that all things, empires, stars, even gods, were temporary. To sit in his presence was to feel the weight of eternity, to understand that everything you held dear would one day dissolve into dust. The gods themselves weren't immune to his aura. They'd come too, floating down from their celestial palaces, their golden chariots parked at the base of the mountain. Brahma, with his 4 faces always muttering something profound, would hover nearby, scribbling ideas for new worlds on a scroll that never seemed to end. Vishnu, calm and blue as a summer sky, would lean on his mace, watching Shiva with a knowing smile, like they shared a secret no one else could grasp. Even the lesser deities, Indra with his thunderbolt, Agni with his flames flickering nervously, would show up, bowing low before scurrying off, intimidated by Shiva's stillness. They all wanted something, guidance, power, or just a nod of approval. But Shiva? He just sat there, his breath slow and steady, his third eye closed but always watching, a faint glow beneath the lid hinting at the fire within. It was said that one glance from that eye could burn lies to ashes, reduce pride to nothing. No one dared test it. Shiva's detachment wasn't cold though. It wasn't like he didn't care. It was more like he saw the bigger picture, the one where beginnings and endings were just notes in the same song. He was the destroyer, sure, but that title didn't tell the whole story. Destruction, in Shiva's hands, wasn't about smashing things for fun. It was about clearing out the old to make room for the new, like pruning a tree so it could bloom again. He was the end of cycles, but also the promise of renewal. The gods knew this, which is why they respected him, even if they didn't always understand him. Mortals, though, had a harder time. Down in the valleys, where villagers huddled around flickering fires, people whispered his name with a mix of fear and awe. To them, Shiva was the storm that could sweep away their homes, the fire that could devour their fields. But they also saw him in the quiet moments, when the rains came after a drought, when a new dawn broke after a long dark night. They didn't have a word for it yet, but they felt it. Shiva was balance. Up on Kailasa, time didn't move the way it did for the rest of the world. Days could stretch into centuries, or a single moment could hold the weight of an eon. Shiva's meditation was like a river, deep and unending, flowing through the ages without a ripple. His companions weren't the chatty types either. The serpent around his neck, Vasuki, was no ordinary snake. It was said to be a king among Nagas, the serpent spirits, who chose to stay with Shiva not out of fear, but loyalty. Vasuki would coil tighter when the winds grew fierce, as if shielding Shiva from the cold, though Shiva needed no protection. Then there was Nandi, the bull lying at the base of the ledge, his white hide gleaming like polished marble. Nandi was Shiva's ride, his guardian, his friend. The bull's eyes, big and soulful, watched the world with a patience that mirrored his master's. If a sage got too close, Nandi would snort, a low rumble that said, "Back off, he's busy." And busy Shiva was in his own way, holding the universe together with his stillness. The crescent moon in his hair wasn't just for show. It was a piece of the cosmos itself, a fragment of the night sky that chose to rest with him. Some said it was the moon god, Chandra, humbled by Shiva's power and begging to stay close. Others thought it was a gift from the heavens, a mark of Shiva's dominion over time and tides. Whatever it was, it glowed softly, casting shadows that danced on the snow around him. The moon's light seemed to carry stories of worlds born and worlds undone, of battles fought and loves lost. Shiva's hair held more than just the moon though. It was said the sacred river Ganga, before she flowed to the earth, was tangled in those matted locks, her waters waiting for Shiva's command to spill forth and bless the world. But that's a story for another time. For now, the Ganga was just a whisper, a promise held in the wild strands of his hair. Shiva's trident, the Trishul, was another mystery. It wasn't just a weapon, but a symbol of his power over the three realms, heaven, earth, and the underworld. Each prong stood for something: creation, preservation, destruction, or maybe past, present, future. The sages argued about it, their debates echoing through the caves below Kailasa, but Shiva never clarified. He didn't need to. The trident rested against his shoulder, its tips glinting like they could cut through reality itself. It was said that when Shiva wielded it, mountains crumbled, seas parted, and demons fled. But for now, it was still like him, waiting for the moment it was needed. The ash on his body too was more than it seemed. It wasn't just dirt or the remnants of a fire. It was the ash of the world itself, the residue of everything that had been and would be again. Shiva wore it like a second skin, a reminder that all things return to dust, and from dust, new things rise. Life around Kailasa wasn't all silence and solemnity. The mountain was alive in its own way, buzzing with spirits and creatures drawn to Shiva's presence. Yakshas, those mischievous nature spirits, darted through the pines, their laughter like the chime of bells. Gandharvas, the celestial musicians, sometimes played soft melodies on their lutes, hoping to catch Shiva's ear. Even the wind seemed to sing his name, carrying it down to the valleys where mortals built small shrines of stone and clay. These early worshippers didn't have grand temples or golden idols. They had faith, raw and simple, born from the stories of travelers who'd seen the ash-smeared god on the mountain. They'd leave offerings at the base of Kailasa, flowers, milk, a handful of rice, hoping for protection, for wisdom, or just for a glimpse of the divine. Shiva never acknowledged these gifts, but the offerings never went to waste. Birds would carry the flowers, ants would march off with the rice, and the milk would sink into the earth, as if the mountain itself was drinking it. Sometimes a brave soul would climb higher than the rest, driven by a burning question or a desperate need. One such sage was Brega, a stubborn old man with a temper as fiery as his beard. He'd heard the tales of Shiva's wisdom and decided he'd demand an audience. The climb was brutal, slippery ice, jagged rocks and winds that felt like they could peel the skin off your bones. Brego cursed with every step, but he kept going, his staff clacking against the stone. When he finally reached Shiva's ledge, he found the god in meditation, unmoving, his breath so faint it barely stirred the air. Brego waited, first patiently, then not so much. He cleared his throat, tapped his staff, even shouted a few choice words about divine manners. Shiva didn't budge. Nandi snorted, giving Brego a look that could have curdled milk. Finally exhausted, Brego sat down, his anger fading into something like awe. He watched Shiva for days, maybe weeks, losing track of time. And in that silence, Brego found his answer, not in words, but in the stillness that seemed to hold the weight of the universe. He left Kailasa a quieter man, his heart full of something he couldn't quite name. Shiva's detachment didn't mean he was unaware. He felt the world's pulse, the joys and sorrows of every living thing. He knew when a star died in a distant galaxy, when a child laughed in a village below, when a deer fled from a tiger's jaws. His meditation wasn't an escape, but a connection, a way to hold the cosmos in his mind. The gods often wondered why he chose Kailasa, why he didn't sit in a golden palace like they did. But Shiva had no use for gold or glory. The mountain was his throne, the snow his crown, the silence his kingdom. He was the destroyer, yes, but also the one who understood that destruction was just the first step toward creation. Every ending was a beginning, every death a seed for new life. The universe spun on this truth, and Shiva was its guardian, its guide, its eternal heart. As the ages rolled on, Shiva's presence on Kailasa became a legend, a story whispered across the cosmos. He was the ascetic who saw through the illusion of permanence, the god who wore ash and carried a trident, the one whose silence spoke louder than any sermon. The gods came and went, the sages meditated and passed on, but Shiva remained, unchanging, his eyes fixed on the infinite. The crescent moon glowed, the serpent hissed softly, and Nandi kept watch. The world below turned, empires rose and fell, but on Kailasa time was just a guest, not a master. Shiva sat, the eternal ascetic, holding the balance of existence in his stillness, ready to dance when the moment called, to destroy so that the world could be born anew. The dance of creation and destruction. As the universe stretched its limbs and time began to weave its endless tapestry, Shiva stirred from his stillness on Mount Kailasa. He wasn't just the silent ascetic anymore, content to let the world spin without him. No, something deeper was calling, a rhythm pulsing through the cosmos that only he could hear. It was the beat of existence itself, the hum of stars being born, the sigh of worlds fading away. Shiva felt it in his bones, if you could call his divine form something as ordinary as bones. He rose from his tiger skin, his ash-smeared body catching the faint glow of the crescent moon in his matted hair, and he stepped into the vastness of the heavens. The gods, lounging in their celestial palaces, felt a shift in the air, like the universe was holding its breath. They knew something big was coming. Shiva wasn't just going to sit this one out. He was about to show the cosmos what he was really made of. Down in the golden halls of Chidambaram, a place that wasn't quite on earth and not fully in the heavens either, the stage was set. Chidambaram was special, a cosmic crossroads, where the veil between worlds was thin, where the divine and the mortal could brush shoulders. Its halls shimmered with a light that didn't come from any sun, and its walls seemed to hum with secrets older than time. The gods gathered there, their chatter a mix of excitement and nerves. Brahma was there, his 4 faces muttering about new galaxies he wanted to sketch out. Vishnu leaned back, his blue skin catching the glow, looking like he already knew how this was going to play out. Indra clutched his thunderbolt a little too tightly, like he wasn't sure if he should be thrilled or terrified. Even the sages showed up, their long beards trailing like wisps of cloud, their eyes wide with the kind of awe you only get when you know you're about to witness something that'll change you forever. They all felt it. The air was electric, charged with the promise of Shiva's power. Shiva didn't make them wait long. He appeared in the center of the hall, not with a flash or a boom, but quietly, like he'd always been there. His trident rested lightly in one hand, the damaru drum in the other, its small hourglass shape looking harmless enough. But that drum was no toy. It was the heartbeat of the universe, the sound that could start or stop time itself. Shiva's eyes, usually half closed in meditation, were open now, and they burned with a fire that made even the bravest gods look away. His serpent, Vasuki, uncoiled from his neck and slithered to the floor, watching the crowd with a flick of its tongue. Nandi, his faithful bull, stood at the edge of the hall, his massive head lowered, like he was guarding the moment itself. The crescent moon in Shiva's hair glowed brighter, casting shadows that danced across the golden walls. And then, without a word, Shiva began to move. It started with a single step, slow and deliberate, his foot touching the ground like a painter brushing a canvas. The hall trembled, not with an earthquake, but with something deeper, like the universe itself was shifting. He raised the damaru, and with a flick of his wrist, it sounded a deep, resonant beat that echoed through the cosmos. Dum-dum-dum-dum-dum. Each strike was a pulse, a command, and the stars beyond Chidambaram flickered in response. The gods leaned forward, their breath caught in their throats. Shiva's movements grew faster, his body a blur of grace and power. His arms swept through the air, flames trailing from his fingertips, forming patterns that looked like galaxies spinning into being. With every step, the ground seemed to ripple, and the sages swore they saw mountains rise and crumble in the distance. This was the Tandava, Shiva's cosmic dance, and it was no ordinary performance. It was the universe telling its own story through him. The Tandava wasn't just a dance, it was creation and destruction woven together, a story told in motion. When Shiva leaped, his feet barely touching the ground, new worlds sparked into existence. Planets bloomed, their surfaces shimmering with oceans and forests. When he spun, his matted hair whipping like a storm, entire galaxies swirled into being, their stars clustering like fireflies. But then came the heavier steps, the ones that made the hall shake, and the gods gripped their seats. With each stomp, something ended. A star collapsed into a black hole, a world dissolved into dust, an era faded into memory. The flames around him grew wilder, licking the air, but they weren't chaotic. They were precise, like a sculptor's chisel, carving away what was no longer needed. The damaru kept its rhythm, dum-dum-dum-dum, and the universe danced with it, expanding and contracting, living and dying in perfect balance. What struck everyone most wasn't the power, though that was terrifying enough, but the calm on Shiva's face. His eyes burned, sure, but his lips curved in a faint smile, like he was in on some cosmic joke the rest of them couldn't grasp. He wasn't angry or vengeful, he was just doing what he was meant to do, keeping the cycle turning. The gods watched, their jaws slack, as entire constellations flickered in and out of existence with each of his movements. Brahma scribbled furiously, trying to keep up with the new worlds Shiva was sparking. Vishnu nodded slowly, like he was keeping time with the Damaru. Even Indra, usually so full of himself, was quiet, his thunderbolt forgotten in his lap. The sages, bless their hearts, were weeping, not out of fear, but because they saw it, the truth of existence laid bare. Everything was temporary, yet everything was eternal, all because of Shiva's dance. The Tandava went on for what felt like forever, though time didn't mean much in Chidambaram. Hours, days, maybe eons passed, and still Shiva danced. His steps grew fiercer, the flames brighter, until the hall itself seemed to dissolve, leaving only the cosmos around them. The gods and sages were no longer in a golden hall but floating in a sea of stars, watching Shiva spin through the void. His trident gleamed, its prongs catching the light of dying suns, and with a single thrust, he shattered a nebula, its fragments scattering like seeds for new worlds. His serpent, Vasuki, coiled and uncoiled, mimicking the spiral of galaxies. The crescent moon in his hair pulsed, its light waxing and waning, as if time itself was bending to Shiva's will. And through it all, the Damaru never stopped, its dum-dum a reminder that this dance wasn't random, it was the rhythm of life itself. Down on earth mortals felt the echo of Shiva's dance, though they couldn't see it. In villages nestled in valleys fires burned brighter, and winds howled with a strange melody. Rivers surged, then calmed, as if unsure whether to flood or flow gently. Shamans and seers, those sensitive to the divine, fell into trances, their visions filled with a figure wreathed in flames, his steps shaking the earth. They didn't know his name yet, not all of them, but they felt him. They painted his image on cave walls, a man with wild hair, a drum in one hand, a trident in the other, flames curling around him. They told stories of a god who danced the world into being and out again, a god who was both terrifying and beautiful. These early tales spread, carried by travelers and traders, planting the seeds of Shiva's legend in human hearts. Back in Chidambaram, the dance reached its peak. Shiva's movements grew so fast they blurred, his body a whirlwind of light and shadow. The flames around him formed a perfect circle, a ring of fire that held the universe in its embrace. The gods shielded their eyes, unable to bear the intensity, but the sages kept watching, their tears mixing with smiles. They saw it now. Shiva wasn't just destroying or creating, he was both at once, holding the paradox in his hands. With a final earth-shaking step, he stopped, the Damaru falling silent. The flames faded, the cosmos settled, and the hall of Chidambaram reappeared, its golden walls glowing softly. Shiva stood in the center, his chest rising and falling, his smile unchanged. The gods and sages were speechless, their hearts full of something they couldn't name. Shiva didn't say a word, he didn't need to. He sat down, cross-legged, his trident resting against his shoulder, his Damaru in his lap. Vasuki slithered back to his neck, coiling comfortably, and Nandi let out a low, contented huff. The crescent moon dimmed, its work done for now. The gods slowly dispersed, their minds buzzing with what they'd seen. Brahma clutched his scrolls, muttering about new worlds to build. Vishnu gave Shiva a nod, like they'd just shared a quiet drink. Indra slunk off, his ego bruised, but his respect for Shiva deeper than ever. The sages stayed longest, some bowing, others just staring, trying to hold on to the vision of the Tandava. They knew they'd carry this moment forever, a glimpse of the divine that would shape their teachings for generations. The dance didn't end there, not really. Shiva's Tandava was eternal, a rhythm that played on in the cosmos, even when he sat still. Every star that flared, every world that crumbled, Every life that began or ended, it was all part of his dance. Mortals began to build shrines, simple at first, just stones piled high with offerings of flowers and milk. They called him Nataraja, the lord of the dance, and his image spread, carved in rock, painted on walls, sung in hymns. The Damaru's beat echoed in their chants, dum 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 dum, a reminder that life and death were two sides of the same coin. Shiva, back on Kailasa, felt these prayers though he never sought them. He was the destroyer, yes, but also the one who made creation possible. His dance was the universe's heartbeat, and as long as he moved, the cosmos would keep spinning, dying and being born anew. The love of Sati. The universe was humming along, its stars twinkling and worlds spinning. But up on Mount Kailasa, something felt off. Shiva, the eternal ascetic, was deep in his meditation, his ash-smeared body as still as the snow around him. His crescent moon glowed faintly, his serpent Vasuki coiled lazily around his neck, and Nandi, his bull, dozed at the base of his rocky ledge. Everything seemed calm, but the gods in their celestial halls were getting antsy. Shiva's detachment was throwing things out of whack. Brahma, always tinkering with new creations, kept muttering about how the cycle of existence needed balance. Vishnu, cool as ever, agreed but didn't push. They both knew Shiva was the key, the destroyer who cleared the old to make way for the new. But he was too lost in his inner world, too far from the chaos of creation. Something had to give, and the gods decided it was time to shake things up. They turned to Shakti, the divine feminine, the energy that powered the cosmos. If anyone could get Shiva's attention, it was her. Shakti didn't need much convincing. She was the spark of life, the force that made stars burn and rivers flow, and she knew Shiva's heart better than anyone. She decided to take form, not as a blazing goddess but as a woman, someone who could walk the earth and reach Shiva in a way the gods couldn't. So in a quiet valley nestled between towering mountains, Sati was born. She came into the world as the daughter of King Daksha, a proud, powerful ruler who thought he was the center of the universe. Sati was nothing like her father. She was radiant, with eyes that sparkled like the night sky, and a spirit that felt like a warm breeze on a summer day. From the moment she could walk, she was drawn to the stories of Shiva, the wild god who lived on a mountain, covered in ash, with a trident that could split the heavens. While other girls in Daksha's palace giggled about princes and jewels, Sati's heart was set on the ascetic, who seemed to care for nothing but his meditation. Daksha, of course, wasn't thrilled about his daughter's obsession. He was a king after all, and he had big plans for Sati, maybe a marriage to some golden-armored god like Indra, or a celestial prince with a chariot to match. Shiva, no way. Daksha saw him as a drifter, a weirdo who hung out with ghosts and smeared himself with ash like some kind of cosmic hobo. He'd scoff whenever Sati mentioned Shiva, telling her to focus on more suitable matches. But Sati wasn't the type to listen to her father's lectures. She'd slip out of the palace at dawn, her bare feet padding across the dewy grass, and sit by a stream, whispering Shiva's name like a prayer. She'd heard the tales, how he danced the Tandava to spin the universe, how his third eye could burn lies to cinders. To her he wasn't just the destroyer, he was the one who saw the truth of things, the one who held the cosmos in his silence. As Sati grew, her love for Shiva only deepened. She wasn't just some dreamy kid with a crush, she was fierce, determined like a flame that wouldn't flicker out. By the time she was a young woman, her beauty was the talk of the heavens. Her skin glowed like polished bronze, her hair flowed like a river at midnight, and her smile could make even the grumpiest sage forget his vows. But it was her spirit that set her apart. She had Shakti's fire, a quiet strength that made the gods take notice. Brahma, always scheming, saw her as the perfect way to pull Shiva out of his trance. Vishnu, with his knowing smile, gave a nod, like he'd seen this coming all along. Even the lesser gods like Agni and Vayu started whispering about the girl who was born to tame the wild god. But Sati didn't care about their plans. She wasn't here to fix the universe's balance for them. She just wanted Shiva. One spring morning, when the valleys were bursting with flowers and the air smelled of jasmine, Sati made up her mind. She wasn't going to wait for fate to bring her to Shiva. She'd go to him. She packed a small bundle, some fruit, a shawl, a clay pot for offerings, and left Daksha's palace without a word. The journey to Kailasa was no joke. The paths were steep, the winds brutal, and the snow didn't care who you were, king's daughter or not. But Sati didn't flinch. She climbed, her breath puffing in the cold, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. She'd heard the stories of sages who'd tried to reach Shiva and turned back, frozen or just plain spooked by his aura. Sati wasn't like them. She wasn't climbing for wisdom or blessings. She was climbing for love, and that made all the difference. When she finally reached Kailasa, the sight took her breath away. The mountain loomed like a giant, its peaks stabbing the sky, draped in snow that sparkled like diamonds. The air was so thin it felt like breathing glass, but Sati didn't care. She found Shiva on a rocky ledge, just like the stories said, sitting cross-legged on a tiger skin. His ash-covered body was still, his matted hair piled high, the crescent moon casting a soft glow. Vasuki, the serpent, flicked its tongue, eyeing her curiously. Nandi, the bull, lifted his head, giving her a once-over like a bouncer at a divine club. Sati stood there, her heart racing, but she didn't back down. She set her bundle down and knelt, not out of fear but respect. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Shiva didn't move, his eyes half closed, lost in his endless meditation. But Sati wasn't discouraged. She'd come this far, and she wasn't leaving. Days turned into weeks, and Sati stayed. She made a small camp near Shiva's ledge, a simple shelter of branches and cloth. Every morning, she'd gather wild flowers from the lower slopes, their petals bright against the snow, and lay them at Shiva's feet. She'd fetch water from a nearby stream, pouring it into her clay pot, and offering it to him, though he never drank. She chanted his name softly, her voice blending with the wind, a melody that seemed to make even the rocks listen. The gods watched from above, nudging each other like kids at a school play. Brahma was practically giddy, thinking his plan was working. Vishnu just smiled, like he knew something they didn't. Even Indra, who wasn't exactly Team Shiva, had to admit Sati was something special. But Daksha, he was furious. When he found out his daughter had run off to chase some ash-smeared hermit, he ranted for days, his palace shaking with his anger. Sati didn't care. She was where she belonged. Shiva, for his part, didn't make it easy. He stayed in his trance, his breath so slow it was like he wasn't breathing at all. Sati could have been a rock or a bird for all the attention he gave her. But she wasn't just anyone, she was Shiki's spark, and that spark was stubborn. She started meditating beside him, mimicking his pose, her eyes half closed, her breath steady. The cold bit at her skin, the wind tugged at her shawl, but she didn't budge. She wasn't trying to impress him. She was showing him she understood his world, his silence. The sages who'd made the trek to Kailasa started whispering about her. "That's no ordinary girl," they'd say, their beards wagging. "She's got the fire of the goddess in her." And they were right. Sati's devotion wasn't just love, it was power, raw and unyielding, like the universe itself was rooting for her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the peaks and the sky turned a deep indigo, something changed. Sati was meditating, her body shivering but steady, when she felt a warmth, like a candle flickering nearby. She opened her eyes, and there he was, Shiva, looking at her. His eyes, usually lost in the cosmos, were fixed on her, and they weren't cold or distant. They were deep, like pools of starlight, and for the first time Sati saw something in them, a spark, a flicker of recognition. Her heart skipped, but she didn't move, didn't speak. She just held his gaze, letting him see her, really see her. Shiva's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close enough to make the wind feel warmer. He didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. That look was enough. Sati knew she'd reached him. The gods, of course, couldn't keep their noses out of it. Brahma was practically dancing, claiming credit for the whole thing. Vishnu just chuckled, telling him to calm down. They sent a flurry of celestial messengers, Gandharvas with their lutes, Apsaras with their flowing silks, to Kailasa, turning the snowy ledge into a festival. The air filled with music, the scent of sandalwood, and the glow of 1,000 floating lamps. Sati and Shiva didn't need all the fuss, but they didn't stop it either. When they finally spoke, it wasn't with grand declarations. Shiva's voice was low, like the rumble of a distant storm. "You are persistent," he said, and Sati laughed, a sound that made even Nandi perk up. "You're not easy to reach," she shot back. That was it. No flowery vows, no cosmic promises, just two souls who understood each other. Their wedding was nothing like Daksha's over-the-top palace parties. It was simple, held on Kailasa's slopes under a sky full of stars. The gods showed up, of course, unable to resist a good love story. Brahma officiated, muttering mantras from all four mouths at once. Vishnu blessed them with a smile that said he'd known this was coming since the dawn of time. Even Indra showed up, though he sulked a bit, still sore about Shiva's whole "I'm above your drama" vibe. Sati wore a simple red sari, her hair adorned with wild flowers, and Shiva, well, he was still Shiva, ash, trident, and all. Vasuki slithered happily around his neck, and Nandi stood guard, snorting at anyone who got too close. The ceremony was quick, sealed with a garland exchange, and a shared glance that held the weight of eternity. After the wedding, Sati and Shiva didn't settle into some fancy divine palace. They wandered, free as the wind, through forests and mountains, their love a quiet flame that warmed the world. Sati brought light to Shiva's austerity, teasing him when he got too serious, laughing when he tried to explain the cosmos in his rumbling voice. Shiva, for the first time, felt something new, a softness, a warmth that didn't weaken his power, but made it deeper. They'd sit by rivers, Sati weaving flower crowns, while Shiva told her about stars that had died before the earth was born. The universe felt steadier with them together, like a song finally finding its rhythm. The gods sighed in relief, thinking their plan had worked, but Daksha, he wasn't done. His pride was wounded, and he was brewing a storm that would test Sati and Shiva's love in ways no one could have predicted. The sacrifice of Sati. The love between Shiva and Sati was like a fire that warmed the cosmos, steady and bright, burning through the ages. They roamed the wild places of the world, from misty forests to rugged cliffs, their laughter mingling with the songs of rivers and winds. Sati, with her radiant smile and fierce heart, brought a softness to Shiva's austere world, while he, with his ash-smeared body and cosmic gaze, gave her a sense of the infinite. They were balance itself, creation and destruction, light and shadow, woven together in a bond that made even the gods jealous. Up on Mount Kailasa, where the air was sharp and the snow never melted, they'd sit together, Sati weaving wild flowers into his matted hair, while he told her stories of stars that had blinked out before the earth was born. Vasuki the serpent would curl contentedly around Shiva's neck, and Nandi the bull would doze nearby, his snores rumbling like distant thunder. The universe felt right with them together, like a song finally hitting the perfect note. But down in the mortal realm, in the gilded halls of King Daksha's palace, trouble was brewing, and it was about to tear everything apart. Daksha, Sati's father, was not a guy who handled rejection well. He was a king, a big shot among the gods, with a palace so shiny it could blind you and an ego to match. When Sati chose Shiva, the ash-covered hermit, who didn't give a damn about Daksha's wealth or status, it was like a slap to his face. He'd wanted his daughter to marry someone worthy, a god like Indra, maybe with a chariot and a title to brag about. Instead, she picked the guy who lived on a freezing mountain, hung out with ghosts, and wore a snake like a scarf. Daksha never got over it. Every time he heard Sati's name paired with Shiva's, his face would turn red, and he'd rant to anyone who'd listen, servants, courtiers, even the other gods, about how his daughter had thrown her life away. The gods, for their part, mostly nodded politely and changed the subject. They knew better than to mess with Shiva's business. But Daksha, he was too proud to let it go. So Daksha hatched a plan, the kind of petty, spiteful plan only a guy with too much pride could dream up. He decided to throw the biggest, most extravagant sacrificial ritual the world had ever seen, a yagna to end all yagnas. He'd invite every god, sage and celestial bigwig, fill his palace with music and offerings, and show everyone he was still the king of the game. But there was a catch. He wasn't going to invite Shiva. Not just that, he'd make sure Sati knew she wasn't welcome either. It was his way of saying, "You chose that weirdo over me. Fine, you're both out." The gods tried to talk him down. Brahma, with his 4 faces all frowning, warned that snubbing Shiva was a bad move. Vishnu, calm as ever, suggested Daksha rethink his guest list. Even Indra, who wasn't exactly Shiva's biggest fan, thought it was a risky play. But Daksha was stubborn, his pride like a wall no one could breach. He sent out invitations, and the preparations began. Word of the yagna spread fast, carried by the winds and the chatter of celestial messengers. In every corner of the cosmos, gods and sages were buzzing about Daksha's big event. Golden pavilions were raised in his palace, their spires glittering under the sun. Priests chanted mantras, their voices rising over the crackle of sacrificial fires. Apsaras danced, their silks swirling, while Gandharvas played melodies that made the stars hum along. Piles of offerings, sandalwood, ghee, flowers, stacked higher than a man could see. The guest list was a who's who of the divine: Brahma, Vishnu, Indra, Agni, Vayu, and every sage worth their beard. The only names missing, Shiva and Sati. The gods noticed, of course, and the whispers started. "Daksha's playing with fire," they'd say, glancing nervously at the sky, half expecting Shiva's third eye to blaze open. But Daksha didn't care. He was too busy basking in his own glory. Up on Kailasa, Sati heard about the yagna, not from an invitation, Daksha made sure of that, but from a Gandharva who'd flown too close to the mountain and couldn't keep his mouth shut. Sati was sitting with Shiva, weaving a garland of jasmine, when the news hit her like a stone. Her father was throwing the biggest ritual in history and hadn't invited them. It wasn't just an insult, it was a public disowning, a way of telling the world that Sati and her husband were beneath him. Shiva, deep in meditation, didn't react, his face as calm as a frozen lake. But Sati's heart ached. She wasn't mad, not yet, just hurt, like a kid who'd been left out of a family gathering. She looked at Shiva, hoping he'd say something, but he just sat there, his eyes half closed, the crescent moon in his hair glowing softly. Sati didn't need his permission, but she wanted his support. "I have to go," she said, her voice trembling but firm. Shiva opened his eyes, just a sliver, and gave her a look that said he knew this wasn't going to end well. But he didn't stop her, he never would. Sati set off for Daksha's palace, her heart a tangle of hope and dread. She didn't take a chariot, or a retinue. She wasn't like her father, who loved a big entrance. She walked, her red sari catching the wind, her bare feet steady on the rocky paths. The journey was long, through valleys and over rivers, but Sati's spirit burned bright. She wasn't going to demand an apology, or beg for her father's approval. She just wanted to see him, to bridge the gap that had grown between them. Maybe, she thought, if she showed up, he'd soften, remember the daughter he'd raised, the girl who used to run to him with flowers in her hair. The gods watched her go, their faces grim. Brahma shook his heads, all 4 of them. Vishnu sighed, his eyes following her like a parent watching a child walk into a storm. Even the wind seemed to whisper warnings, but Sati kept going, her love for her father stronger than her fear. When she reached Daksha's palace, the sight nearly overwhelmed her. The place was a spectacle, golden spires, fragrant smoke curling from massive fire pits, music that vibrated through the earth. Gods and sages milled about, their voices a low hum under the chants of the priests. Sati stepped into the courtyard, her sari a splash of red against the sea of gold and white. The crowd parted, whispers rippling like waves. "It's Sati," they murmured, their eyes darting between her and Daksha, who stood by the main altar, his chest puffed out like a peacock. Sati approached, her head high, her heart pounding. She didn't expect a warm welcome, but she hoped for something, a nod, a smile, anything to show he still cared. Instead, Daksha's face darkened when he saw her. He stepped forward, his voice sharp enough to cut stone. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "You and your beggar husband weren't invited." The words hit Sati like a physical blow. The courtyard fell silent, the music faltering, the fires crackling louder in the stillness. The gods froze, their eyes wide. Sati stood there, her hands trembling, but she didn't back down. "I'm your daughter," she said, her voice steady despite the pain. "I came to honor you, to be part of this." Daksha laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made even Indra flinch. "Honor me," he spat. "You chose that ash-smeared madman over your family. You're no daughter of mine." He turned to the crowd, his voice booming. "Shiva is no god, he's a wild man, a disgrace, unfit for this sacred rite." The words kept coming, each one a dagger, tearing at Sati's heart. She looked around, hoping someone would speak up. Brahma, Vishnu, anyone, but they stayed silent, their heads bowed. They weren't cowards, but they knew better than to challenge Daksha in his own palace. Sati's pain turned to fire. She wasn't just hurt now, she was furious, not at Daksha's words, but at the dishonor to Shiva. She stepped closer to the altar, her eyes blazing, her voice rising like a storm. "You call Shiva unfit," she said, her words echoing through the courtyard. "He is the universe itself, the one who holds creation and destruction in his hands. You, with your pride and your gold, are nothing compared to him." The crowd gasped, but Sati wasn't done. She looked at the sacrificial fire, its flames dancing like they were listening. "If this is what it means to be your daughter, to stand in a world that insults my love, then I want no part of it." Before anyone could stop her, she stepped toward the fire, her sari trailing behind her. The gods cried out, Brahma's voices overlapping in panic, Vishnu reaching out too late. Sati closed her eyes, summoning the fire within her, the fire of Shakti, her true essence, and stepped into the flames. The fire roared, consuming her in an instant, her form vanishing in a blaze of light. The courtyard shook, the golden spires trembling as if the earth itself was grieving. The gods stood frozen, their faces pale, their hearts heavy with guilt. Daksha staggered back, his pride crumbling into shock, but it was too late. Sati was gone, her sacrifice a cry that echoed through the cosmos. Up on Kailasa, Shiva felt it, a pain so sharp it tore through his meditation like a blade. His eyes snapped open, his third eye blazing red, and a roar erupted from his throat, shaking the heavens. The crescent moon dimmed, Vasuki hissed in alarm, and Nandi bellowed, sensing his master's grief. Shiva rose, his trident in hand, and descended to the earth, his steps cracking the ground beneath him. When he reached Daksha's palace, the sight broke him. Sati's body, charred and lifeless, lay in the ashes of the sacrificial fire. The gods scattered, terrified of the storm in Shiva's eyes. Daksha tried to speak, to justify himself, but Shiva's grief was a force of nature. He lifted Sati's body, cradling it like a child, and began to wander, his steps aimless, his sorrow a weight that threatened to unravel the world. Mountains crumbled in his wake, rivers dried up, and the stars flickered, as if the cosmos itself was mourning. Vishnu, seeing the danger, followed quietly, his heart heavy. He knew Shiva's grief could destroy everything. With a gentle hand, he sent his discus, the Sudarshana, to dismember Sati's body, piece by piece, scattering her remains across the earth.
Each fragment became a sacred shrine, a place where her love would live on. Shiva felt the loss anew with each piece that fell, but it saved the world from his wrath. He returned to Kailasa, his heart shattered, his trident heavy in his hand. He sat on his tiger skin, his eyes fixed on the horizon, and vowed never to love again. The gods watched from afar, guilt gnawing at them. Daksha, humbled and broken, retreated into silence, his palace empty of its former glory. The universe mourned, but Sati's sacrifice wasn't the end. Her love, her fire, would return, because Shakti could never be extinguished. For now though, Shiva was alone, his silence deeper than ever, his heart a wound that only time and a new spark could heal. The return of Parvati. The universe kept spinning after Sati's sacrifice, but it felt like someone had turned down the volume. The stars still twinkled, rivers still flowed, but there was a heaviness in the air, a quiet ache that lingered like a bruise. Up on Mount Kailasa, Shiva was a shadow of himself. He sat on his tiger skin, ash smeared thicker than ever, his matted hair tangled with the crescent moon, which seemed to glow dimmer now. Vasuki, the serpent, stayed coiled around his neck, silent and watchful, while Nandi, his bull, lay at the base of the ledge, his big eyes full of worry. Shiva's meditation was deeper, darker, like he was trying to bury his grief in silence. The gods felt it too, down in their golden palaces. Brahma was fidgety, his four faces muttering about how the cosmos needed Shiva's spark to keep the cycle moving. Vishnu, usually so chill, had a crease in his brow, knowing Shiva's heart was still raw from Sati's loss. Something had to change, and the answer, as always, lay with Shakti, the divine feminine who never stayed gone for long. Shakti wasn't one to let the universe mope forever. She was the energy that made everything tick, the fire behind the stars, the pulse in every living thing. Sati had been her spark, her way of reaching Shiva, and though her sacrifice had shaken the heavens, Shakti wasn't done. She decided to come back, not as a blazing goddess but as a woman, someone who could climb Kailasa and crack open Shiva's heart again. So, in a lush valley cradled by the Himalayas, where the air smelled of pine and the rivers sang softly, Parvati was born. She was the daughter of Himavan, the mountain king, and his wife Mena, who doted on her like she was the only star in the sky. Parvati was different from Sati, gentler in some ways, but with the same fire in her soul. Even as a kid, she had this glow, eyes like dark pools, a laugh that made flowers bloom, and a stubborn streak that could outlast a monsoon. Parvati grew up hearing stories of Shiva, the wild god on the mountain. Her father, Himavan, was a big fan, always talking about how Shiva's presence kept the Himalayas sacred. Unlike Daksha, who'd scoffed at Shiva's ash and trident, Himavan revered him, seeing the destroyer as the key to the universe's balance. Parvati soaked it all in, her heart latching onto Shiva before she even understood why. As a little girl, she'd sit on the slopes, staring up at Kailasa's snowy peaks, imagining the god who sat there, lost in his thoughts. She'd play at being an ascetic, sitting cross-legged on a rock, pretending to meditate, though she'd giggle and ruin it every time a butterfly landed on her nose. Her mother, Mena, would shake her head, saying, "You're too young for such dreams." But Parvati wasn't just dreaming. She knew deep down that her life was tied to Shiva, like a river destined to meet the sea. By the time Parvati was a young woman, her beauty was the talk of the mountains. Her skin was like polished sandalwood, her hair a cascade of midnight, and her smile could make even the grumpiest yaksha grin. But it was her spirit that really stood out. She had this quiet strength, a mix of patience and fire, that made the gods take notice. Brahma, always scheming, saw her as the perfect way to pull Shiva out of his funk. Vishnu, with his knowing smirk, gave a nod, like he'd been waiting for her all along. The lesser gods, Agni, Vayu, the whole celestial crew, started whispering about the mountain girl who was born to tame the destroyer. Parvati didn't care about their gossip.
She wasn't here to play cosmic matchmaker for the gods. She just wanted Shiva, not because he was a god, but because she felt him in her soul, like a melody she'd known forever. One crisp morning, when the mist hung low and the peaks glowed pink with dawn, Parvati made her move. She wasn't going to wait for fate to drop her at Shiva's feet. She packed a small bundle, some fruit, a shawl, a clay pot for offerings, and set off for Kailasa. The climb was brutal, with icy winds that stung like needles and paths so steep they'd make a goat think twice. But Parvati was no stranger to the mountains. She moved with a grace that made the rocks seem soft, her breath steady even as the air thinned. She sang softly to herself, old hymns her father had taught her, her voice blending with the wind. The gods watched from above, nudging each other like kids betting on a race. Brahma was practically rubbing his hands together, thinking his plan was foolproof. Vishnu just leaned back, his blue skin catching the light, looking like he already knew the ending. Parvati didn't notice their stares. Her eyes were fixed on Kailasa, on the ledge where Shiva sat, lost in his grief. When she reached his ledge, the sight stopped her cold. There he was, Shiva still as a statue, his ash-covered body blending with the snow. His matted hair was a wild crown, the crescent moon barely glowing, like it was morning too. Vasuki slithered slowly, eyeing her with suspicion, while Nandi lifted his head, snorting like a bouncer checking her ID. Parvati's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. She set her bundle down, and knelt, not out of fear but respect. "I'm here," she said softly, her voice steady despite the chill. Shiva didn't move, his eyes half closed, his breath so faint it barely stirred the air. Parvati wasn't fazed. She'd heard the stories, how Sati had won him with devotion, how his heart was locked away after her loss. She wasn't here to replace Sati, she was here to be Parvati, to love him as herself, and she was ready to wait as long as it took. Days turned into weeks, and Parvati stayed. She set up a small camp near Shiva's ledge, a simple shelter of branches and cloth, sturdy enough to withstand the howling winds. Every morning, she'd sweep the area around his tiger skin, brushing away snow with a gentleness that made even Nandi soften. She'd gather wild flowers from the lower slopes, their petals bright against the white, and lay them at his feet. She'd fetch water from a frozen stream, cracking the ice with a rock, and pour it into her clay pot as an offering, though Shiva never touched it. She chanted his name, her voice a soft hum that wove through the mountain's silence, like a thread stitching the world together. The gods watched, their excitement fading into impatience. "She's wasting her time," Indra grumbled, twirling his thunderbolt. Brahma shushed him, his eyes glued to the scene. Vishnu just smiled, like he was watching a flower bloom in slow motion. Shiva, for his part, was a tough nut to crack. He stayed in his trance, his body unmoving, his heart sealed tight. Sati's loss had left a wound that even a god couldn't heal overnight, and he wasn't about to let some mountain girl waltz in and change that. Parvati didn't push, she just kept showing up, day after day, her presence steady as the sunrise. She'd sit beside him, mimicking his meditation, her breath syncing with the rhythm of the wind. The cold bit at her skin, the snow soaked her shawl, but she didn't complain. She wasn't trying to impress him, she was showing him she could live in his world, share his silence. The sages who'd trekked to Kailasa started talking. "That girl's got Shakti's fire," they'd whisper, their beards wagging. "She's no ordinary soul." And they were right. Parvati wasn't just a king's daughter, she was the goddess reborn, and her love was a force that could move mountains. The gods, impatient as ever, decided to meddle. They sent Kama, the god of love, to speed things up. Kama was a charmer, all smiles and flowery arrows, the kind of guy who could make anyone fall in love with a glance. He floated down to Kailasa, his bow ready, his wife Rati giggling at his side. "This'll be easy," he boasted, knocking an arrow tipped with jasmine. He aimed at Shiva, who was still deep in meditation, and let the arrow fly. Big mistake.
The arrow hit, but Shiva's third eye snapped open, a blaze of fire that made the snow sizzle. Kama didn't even have time to blink before that fiery gaze turned him to ash, his bow clattering to the ground. Rati wailed, the gods gasped, and Parvati just sighed, shaking her head. "Nice try," she muttered, sweeping up Kama's ashes like it was just another day. Shiva closed his eye and went back to meditating, but Parvati swore she saw the corner of his mouth twitch, like he was amused despite himself. That little stunt didn't stop Parvati. If anything, it made her more determined. She decided to up her game, not with arrows or tricks, but with something Shiva would understand: tapas, the intense meditation that burned away the ego. She found a flat rock near his ledge, sat cross-legged, and closed her eyes. The winds howled, the snow piled around her, but she didn't budge. Her breath slowed, her body glowed with an inner fire, and the mountain itself seemed to lean in, listening. Days turned into months, then years. Her shawl frayed, her skin roughened, but her spirit only grew brighter, like a flame fed by devotion. The gods watched, their jaws dropping. Brahma stopped muttering, Vishnu's smile widened, and even Indra shut up for once. The sages started calling her Uma, the light, because her tapas lit up Kailasa like a second sun. One stormy night, when the sky was a mess of thunder and lightning, something shifted. Parvati was deep in her tapas, her body still despite the gale. When she felt a warmth, like a hand brushing her soul, she opened her eyes, and there was Shiva, looking at her. His eyes, usually lost in the cosmos, were locked on hers, and they weren't cold or distant. They were deep, searching, like he was seeing Sati's fire in her, but also something new, Parvati's own light. Her heart raced, but she didn't move, just held his gaze. Shiva's voice, low and rumbling, broke the silence. "You don't give up, do you?" he said, almost teasing. Parvati smiled, her first real smile in years. "Not when it's you," she replied. That was it. No grand speeches, just truth. Shiva's lips curved, not quite a smile, but close enough to make the storm feel softer. The gods couldn't contain themselves. The heavens erupted in celebration, apsaras dancing, Gandharvas playing, lamps floating like stars. Brahma claimed credit, of course, his four faces beaming. Vishnu just chuckled, like he'd known the ending all along. Parvati and Shiva didn't need the fanfare. Their wedding was simple, held on Kailasa's slopes under a sky full of constellations. Parvati wore a green sari, her hair braided with mountain flowers, and Shiva was still Shiva, ash, trident, and all. Vasuki slithered happily, Nandi stood guard, and the sages chanted hymns that echoed through the peaks. The ceremony was quiet, sealed with a garland exchange, and a shared look that held the weight of eternity. Parvati wasn't Sati, and Shiva didn't want her to be. She was his partner, his balance, and together, they made the universe hum again, like a song finding its rhythm after a long lonely pause.
The birth of Ganesha, with Parvati by his side, Shiva's world felt warmer, like a fire had been kindled on the icy slopes of Mount Kailasa. The two of them were a perfect balance. Shiva with his ash-smeared body and cosmic gaze, Parvati with her gentle smile and fiery spirit. They didn't settle into some fancy divine palace. They preferred the wild, wandering through misty forests, lounging by rivers or sitting together on Kailasa's rocky ledges watching the stars blink awake. Parvati's laughter softened Shiva's silence, and his stories of ancient galaxies made her eyes sparkle. Vasuki, the serpent, slithered happily around Shiva's neck, and Nandi, the bull, seemed to approve of Parvati, giving her a respectful nod whenever she scratched his ears. The gods, up in their golden halls, were thrilled. Brahma stopped fretting about cosmic balance. Vishnu's smirk grew wider, and even Indra admitted the universe felt steadier with Shiva and Parvati together. But life with a god like Shiva was never predictable, and one day, a small act of creation would spark a story that echoed through the ages. Parvati loved her life with Shiva, But let's be real, being married to the destroyer wasn't always easy. He'd disappear for days, sometimes weeks, lost in meditation or off wandering the cosmos, leaving Parvati to hold down the fort on Kailasa. She didn't mind too much, she knew who she'd married, but sometimes she just wanted a little company, someone to share the quiet moments when Shiva was off doing his cosmic thing. One sunny afternoon, while Shiva was away, probably sitting on some distant star, pondering the meaning of eternity, Parvati was feeling particularly lonely. She was in a cave on Kailasa, the air cool and damp, the walls glowing faintly with the light of her presence. She missed having someone to talk to, someone to guard her space when she wanted a moment to herself. That's when the idea hit her. She'd make her own companion. Parvati wasn't just any goddess. She was Shakti, the life force of the universe, so creating something out of nothing was kind of her thing. She looked around the cave, her eyes landing on a pile of turmeric paste she'd been using for her rituals. It was soft, golden, and smelled like earth and spice. Perfect. She scooped it up, her hands moving with the kind of confidence you'd expect from someone who could spark stars into being. She molded the paste like clay, shaping it into the form of a boy, small but sturdy, with round cheeks and a mischievous glint in his eyes, even though he wasn't alive yet. Parvati smiled at her creation, her heart swelling like a mother's. She leaned close, her breath warm, and whispered life into him, her divine energy flowing into the turmeric figure. The boy's eyes blinked open, bright and curious, and he looked up at her with a grin that could melt glaciers. "Mother," he said, his voice soft but clear, and Parvati laughed, pulling him into a hug. She named him Ganesha, the one who'd bring joy and remove obstacles, because she had a feeling he'd be special. Ganesha was a handful from the start, but in the best way. He was small, sure, but he had this big personality, playful, clever, and just a little cheeky. He'd toddle around the cave, his turmeric-colored skin glowing faintly, chasing after Vasuki, who'd hiss in mock annoyance before slithering away. Nandi took to him instantly, letting Ganesha climb onto his back and ride him like a pony, snorting with amusement when the boy tugged at his horns. Parvati was over the moon. She'd teach Ganesha songs, tell him stories of the cosmos, and laugh when he'd try to mimic her chants, his high-pitched voice stumbling over the ancient words. But Ganesha wasn't just a cute kid. He had a spark of Parvati's power, a strength that made the air around him hum. She knew he was destined for more than just keeping her company, but for now, she was happy to have him by her side. One day, Parvati decided to take a bath in the cave spring, a crystal-clear pool fed by a trickle of melted snow. She wanted a little privacy, something even gods crave sometimes. She turned to Ganesha, who was playing with a stick, pretending it was a trident like Shiva's. "Sweetie," she said, ruffling his hair, "I need you to stand guard at the entrance. Don't let anyone in, okay? Not even if they say they're a god." Ganesha puffed out his chest, his eyes serious despite his grin. "No one gets past me, mother," he promised, gripping his stick like a warrior. Parvati chuckled, kissed his forehead, and slipped into the spring, the water cool against her skin. Ganesha took his post at the cave's mouth, his small figure silhouetted against the snowy light, looking way more serious than any kid his age had a right to. Meanwhile, Shiva was on his way back to Kailasa. He'd been off in some cosmic void, probably untangling a knot in the universe's fabric, or chatting with a star about its retirement plans. His steps were light, his trident slung over his shoulder, the crescent moon in his hair glowing bright now that he had Parvati to come home to. Vasuki slithered happily, sensing the mountain air, and Nandi trotted behind, eager for a nap. As Shiva approached the cave, he saw something odd, a small boy standing at the entrance, holding a stick like it was a royal scepter. Shiva raised an eyebrow, amused. He didn't know about Ganesha.
Parvati hadn't had a chance to tell him, and besides, Shiva wasn't big on checking his divine voicemail. "Hey kid," he called, his voice rumbling like a distant storm. "Step aside, I need to see my wife." Ganesha didn't budge. He planted his feet, his stick raised, and gave Shiva a look that could have stopped a charging yak. "No one gets in," he said, his voice firm despite his size. "Mother's orders." Shiva blinked, caught off guard. He wasn't used to being told no, especially not by a pint-sized kid made of turmeric. He laughed, thinking it was a game. "Cute, but I'm Shiva, you know, the destroyer. Move over, little guy." Ganesha didn't flinch. "I don't care who you are," he shot back. "No one gets past me." Shiva's amusement faded, replaced by a flicker of irritation. He wasn't angry, not really, but he was a god, and gods don't take kindly to being challenged, especially not on their own mountain. He stepped forward, expecting the boy to scamper off, but Ganesha held his ground, his eyes blazing with Parvati's fire. The standoff got heated fast. Shiva, used to demons and cosmic battles, didn't think twice. He raised his trident, not to hurt the kid, but to nudge him aside, like you'd shoo a stubborn goat. Ganesha, though, was no goat. He swung his stick, parrying the trident with a strength that made Shiva's eyes widen. The gods, watching from their celestial perch, were freaking out. Brahma's 4 faces were all talking at once, yelling about how this was a disaster. Vishnu tried to stay calm, but even he looked worried, muttering, "This is not going to end well." The sages gathered on the lower slopes, held their breath, sensing the clash of divine wills. Shiva, his patience wearing thin, decided enough was enough. In a moment of fiery impulse, his third eye flared open, and with a single swift motion, he severed Ganesha's head, the boy's small body crumpling to the ground. The mountain went silent, like the universe had hit pause. Shiva stood there, his trident still raised, his chest heaving, the fire in his third eye fading. He didn't feel triumph, just a strange heavy quiet. Then came Parvati's scream, a sound that shook Kailasa to its roots. She burst from the cave, her sari dripping, her eyes wild with grief. She fell to her knees beside Ganesha's lifeless body, her sobs echoing through the peaks. "What have you done?" she cried, her voice breaking. Shiva's heart sank. He hadn't known, hadn't realized this was Parvati's son, their son. He knelt beside her, his trident forgotten, his hands reaching out, but stopping short, unsure how to fix this. The gods watched, frozen, their golden halls dim with guilt. Even Indra, usually so smug, looked away, unable to meet Parvati's tear-filled eyes. Parvati's grief was a storm, fierce and unstoppable. She looked at Shiva, her voice trembling but sharp. "He was our son," she said. "I made him to guard me, to be part of us. And you," she couldn't finish, her words dissolving into sobs. Shiva's face was unreadable, but his eyes, usually so distant, were heavy with regret. He wasn't one for apologies, gods rarely are, but he knew he'd messed up, big time. "I'll make this right," he said, his voice low, like a vow, carved in stone. Parvati didn't respond, just held Ganesha's body, her tears falling like rain. Shiva stood, his mind racing. He couldn't undo what he'd done, but he could try to fix it. He called to his Ganeshas, the wild spirits who followed him, their forms flickering like shadows. "Find the head of the first creature you see," he ordered. "Bring it to me now." The Ganeshas scattered, racing down the mountain, their eyes scanning the forests and valleys. The first creature they found was an elephant, a young one with a strong noble head, grazing by a river. Without hesitation, they took its head, careful to honor its spirit, and rushed it back to Kailasa. Shiva knelt beside Ganesha, his hands steady, despite the weight of what he was about to do. He placed the elephant's head on Ganesha's body, his palms glowing with divine light, as he channeled his power. The air hummed, the snow around them melting, and Ganesha's chest rose with a sudden breath. His new eyes blinked open, big and soulful, his trunk curling slightly. As he looked up at Parvati, she gasped, pulling him into her arms, her tears now a mix of relief and love. "My boy," she whispered, stroking his new face, which was strange but perfect. Shiva watched, his heart easing, but not fully light. He placed a hand on Ganesha's head, his voice soft but firm. "You are Ganesha, the remover of obstacles," he said. "You'll be worshipped first in every ritual, the gatekeeper of beginnings. Your wisdom will guide the world." Ganesha, still a little dazed, gave a small nod, his trunk twitching like he was already planning some mischief. Parvati looked at Shiva, her anger gone, replaced by a quiet gratitude. The gods, who'd been holding their breath, let out a collective cheer, their golden halls ringing with relief. Brahma babbled about cosmic harmony, Vishnu gave Shiva a knowing nod, and even Indra cracked a smile, impressed despite himself. The sages down below started chanting Ganesha's name, their voices carrying through the mountains. Ganesha bounced back fast, his new elephant head giving him a charm that was impossible to resist. He was still the same cheeky kid, but now he had a trunk to snatch extra sweets and big ears that seemed to hear every secret. Parvati doted on him, teaching him the ways of the divine, while Shiva, in his own gruff way, took him under his wing, showing him how to wield power with wisdom. Nandi became Ganesha's best buddy, letting him ride along on his back, while Vasuki played pranks, slithering around Ganesha's trunk when he wasn't looking. The family was complete, a quirky trio that made Kailasa feel like a home. Ganesha's story spread, carried by sages and travelers, his image carved into stones and sung in hymns. He became the god you called on before any big venture, the one who cleared the path and made the impossible possible, all because of a mother's love and a father's mistake, turned into a miracle on a snowy mountain.
The battle with Andhaka, life on Mount Kailasa, had settled into a cozy rhythm for Shiva, Parvati, and their elephant-headed son, Ganesha. The snowy peaks sparkled under the sun, and the air was filled with the soft hum of Parvati's chants, Ganesha's playful laughter, and the occasional snort from Nandi the bull, who seemed to enjoy the family vibe. Shiva was still the wild god, his ash-smeared body and matted hair crowned with the crescent moon. But Parvati's presence grounded him, her warmth softening his cosmic edges. Vasuki, the serpent, slithered happily around his neck, and the couple's love was like a steady fire, keeping the universe's balance just right. The gods, lounging in their golden palaces, were thrilled to see Shiva engaged, not lost in some endless meditation. Brahma stopped stressing about cosmic glitches, and Vishnu's knowing smile grew wider, like he'd always known things would work out. But the universe is never quiet for long, and trouble was brewing in the shadows, ready to test Shiva's power as the destroyer in a way no one expected. Deep in the underworld, where light barely reached and the air was thick with despair, a demon named Andhaka was stirring up chaos. Andhaka wasn't your average troublemaker. He was born from darkness itself, some say from a drop of Shiva's own sweat that fell into the abyss during one of his cosmic dances. Blind as a bat, Andhaka's eyes saw nothing but his heart burned with ambition. He wasn't content skulking in the shadows like most demons. No, he wanted the heavens, the earth, and everything in between. His power grew like a storm, fueled by a mix of rage and envy, and soon he was rallying an army of demons, snarling, claw-wielding creatures who thrived on destruction. Whispers of his plans reached the gods, who started to sweat despite their celestial air conditioning. Andhaka wasn't just after power. He had his sights set on Parvati, convinced that only a goddess like her could match his dark grandeur. The gods knew this was bad news, and they turned to Shiva, the only one who could handle a threat this big. The news hit Kailasa like a cold wind. Parvati was tending to a small garden she'd started near their cave, coaxing flowers to bloom in the snow, when a Gandharva messenger swooped in, his wings flapping nervously. He spilled the beans about Andhaka's plans, his voice shaking as he described the demon's army marching toward the heavens. Parvati's eyes narrowed, but she didn't panic. She'd faced worse than a lovesick demon before. Ganesha, who was nearby, munching on a pile of sweets, perked up, his trunk twitching with curiosity. "Who's this guy think he is?" he mumbled, crumbs flying. Parvati shushed him, her mind already on Shiva, who was meditating on his tiger skin, his trident leaning against a rock. She didn't need to tell him. He felt the disturbance, like a ripple in the cosmic pond. His eyes opened, the third one glowing faintly, and he gave her a look that said, "I've got this." Parvati nodded, trusting him completely, but she couldn't help feeling a twinge of worry. This wasn't just a fight, it was personal. Andhaka didn't waste time. His army poured out of the underworld, a tide of snarling shadows that blotted out the light wherever they went. They marched through forests, leaving them withered, and across rivers, turning them to sludge. The earth trembled under their feet, and the skies darkened, as if the sun itself was scared. The gods, watching from their celestial perch, were freaking out. Brahma's 4 faces were all talking at once, each one suggesting a different plan, none of them good. Vishnu stayed calm, his blue hand steady on his mace, but even he looked tense, knowing Andhaka wasn't just a demon, he was a force, born from Shiva's own essence. Indra, clutching his thunderbolt, muttered about leading a charge, but everyone knew this was Shiva's fight. The sages, gathered in their ashrams, started chanting Shiva's name, their voices rising like a shield against the coming storm. Shiva didn't rush, he stood up slowly, his ash-covered body catching the moonlight, his trident gleaming like it was eager for a fight. Parvati stood by his side, her hand brushing his, a silent reminder that she was with him, no matter what. Ganesha, ever the loyal son, wanted to come along, but Shiva shook his head. "Stay with your mother," he said, his voice gentle but firm. Ganesha pouted, his trunk drooping, but he obeyed, plopping down next to Nandi, who gave him a reassuring nudge. Shiva set off for the battlefield, a valley at the base of Kailasa, where the earth was cracked and barren, perfect for a showdown. His Ganas, those wild shadowy spirits who followed him, swarmed around him, their eyes glinting with excitement. Vasuki hissed, ready for action, and the crescent moon in Shiva's hair glowed brighter, like it was charging up for the fight. When Andhaka's army arrived, it was like a nightmare come to life. The demons were a mess of claws, fangs, and glowing red eyes, their roars shaking the valley. Andhaka himself stood at the front, tall and gaunt, his blind eyes somehow piercing, like he could sense the world through sheer malice. His voice was a low growl, dripping with arrogance. "Shiva," he called, "give me Parvati, and I might let you keep your mountain." The Ganas laughed, a wild, eerie sound, but Shiva didn't even blink. He stepped forward, his trident raised, his face calm but his eyes burning with a fire that made the demons flinch. "You want her," he said, his voice like thunder rolling slow. "Come and try." The valley went quiet for a split second, and then all hell broke loose. The battle was chaos from the start. Shiva moved like a storm, his trident flashing as he cut through demons like they were paper. His Ganas swarmed, their shadowy forms darting in and out, tearing into Andhaka's army with gleeful ferocity. The demons fought back, their claws slashing, their roars deafening, but they were no match for Shiva's power. He spun, his matted hair whipping like a comet's tail, each swing of his trident sending demons flying. The ground cracked under his steps, and the air sizzled with the heat of his third eye, which stayed closed but pulsed with warning. Andhaka, blind but fearless, charged forward, his own power a dark mirror of Shiva's. He wielded a jagged blade, forged in the underworld's fires, and every swing sent shockwaves through the valley, splitting rocks and scorching the earth. The gods watched from above, their golden thrones shaking with every clash. Brahma was a nervous wreck,
muttering about how Andhaka's darkness could tip the cosmic scales. Vishnu stayed quiet, his eyes fixed on Shiva, trusting him to handle it. Indra, for once, kept his mouth shut, too awed by the battle to brag. The sages, down in their ashrams, chanted louder, their voices weaving a protective net around the world. Parvati, back on Kailasa, stood at the cave's entrance, her hands clasped, her heart steady, but her eyes sharp with worry. Ganesha sat beside her, his trunk curled around her arm, whispering, "Father's got this right." Parvati smiled, but it was tight, her faith in Shiva battling the fear of what Andhaka's darkness could do. Shiva and Andhaka finally met in the center of the valley, the air crackling between them. Andhaka's blindness didn't slow him down. He fought with a primal instinct, his blades slashing wildly, each strike aimed at Shiva's heart. Shiva was calm, almost too calm, dodging with a grace that made it look easy. His trident parried Andhaka's blade, the metal singing with each clash, but Andhaka was tricky. His darkness wasn't just physical, it seeped into the air, clouding Shiva's senses, making the valley feel like a maze of shadows. The demon laughed, his voice a rasp. "You can't fight what you can't see," he taunted. Shiva didn't reply, just kept moving, his steps sure, his trident a blur. He wasn't fighting to kill, not yet. He sensed something in Andhaka, a spark of his own essence, twisted but not lost. The battle dragged on, hours turning into days. Shiva's Ganas were tireless, cutting down demons left and right, but Andhaka's army seemed endless, new shadows rising from the earth with every one that fell. Shiva realized the real problem wasn't the army, it was Andhaka himself. The demon's blood was cursed. Every drop that hit the ground spawned a new demon, stronger and meaner than the last. Shiva thrust his trident, piercing Andhaka's side, but the blood splattered, and a dozen new demons sprang up, snarling. The gods gasped, Brahma's faces turning pale, Vishnu's calm cracking just a bit. Shiva's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. Brute force wasn't going to cut it. He needed something else, something only the destroyer could do. Shiva stepped back, his trident planted in the ground, and closed his eyes. The valley went still, the demons pausing, confused. Andhaka laughed, thinking he'd won, but Shiva wasn't done. He reached deep into the core of his power, where creation and destruction met. He wasn't just going to fight Andhaka's darkness, he was going to absorb it. He opened his arms, his body glowing with a light that burned through the shadows. Andhaka's blood, instead of hitting the ground, was drawn to Shiva, sinking into his ash-covered skin. The demon roared, his power weakening, his army faltering. Shiva's third eye flickered, not with fire, but with a softer light, one that saw the spark in Andhaka, the piece of himself that had been lost to darkness. With a final surge, Shiva pulled Andhaka's essence into himself, not to destroy but to transform. The demon's roars turned to cries, then to silence, as his darkness melted into Shiva's light. When it was over, Andhaka stood before him, no longer blind, his eyes clear and full of awe. He fell to his knees, not out of fear but devotion, his heart cleansed of its rage. "Forgive me," he whispered, and Shiva, his face calm, placed a hand on his head. "You are mine," he said, and Andhaka became one of his Ganas, a loyal follower who'd carry his light into the shadows. The valley was quiet, the demon army gone, the earth healing itself under Shiva's gaze. The gods erupted in cheers, their golden halls ringing with relief. Brahma babbled about cosmic balance. Vishnu gave Shiva a nod, like they'd just shared a quiet drink. Indra, for once, didn't sulk, just clapped like a kid at a festival. Parvati, watching from Kailasa, let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding, her smile returning as Ganesh cheered, his trunk waving like a flag. The sages chanted louder, their hymn spreading Andhaka's story, a tale of darkness redeemed by Shiva's grace. Shiva returned to Kailasa, his trident over his shoulder, his steps light despite the battle. Parvati greeted him with a hug, her eyes saying more than words ever could. The battle with Andhaka wasn't just a win, it was a reminder that Shiva's power as the destroyer wasn't about ending things but about transforming them, turning even the darkest hearts into something new.
The poison of the ocean. The universe was humming along nicely, with Shiva and Parvati settled into their life on Mount Kailasa, their son Ganesha bringing a bit of mischief to the snowy peaks. The air was crisp. The crescent moon in Shiva's matted hair glowed softly, and Vasuki, the serpent, slithered contentedly around his neck. Nandi, the bull, lounged nearby, snorting happily whenever Ganesha offered him a sweet. Parvati's laughter echoed through the caves, balancing Shiva's quiet intensity, and their love was like a steady flame keeping the cosmos warm. The gods, up in their golden palaces, were finally chilling out, pleased that Shiva was engaged, not lost in some endless meditation. Brahma wasn't muttering about cosmic imbalances for once, and Vishnu's knowing smile was as calm as ever. But the universe has a way of throwing curveballs, and this time, it came in the form of a churning ocean and a poison that threatened to wipe out everything. It all started with a wild idea. The gods and demons cooked up together, which was rare since they usually couldn't stand each other. The cosmic ocean, a vast shimmering expanse that held the secrets of creation, was rumored to hide the nectar of immortality, Amrita, the stuff that could make you live forever. The gods, led by Indra, wanted it to stay on top of their game, while the demons, always itching for power, weren't about to let the gods hog it. So, in a rare truce, they decided to team up and churn the ocean to get the nectar. They'd use Mount Mandara as a giant churning stick, with Vasuki, Shiva's serpent, volunteering to be the rope. It sounded like a solid plan, but anyone who's ever worked with demons and gods knows that solid plans have a way of going sideways. The churning began with a lot of fanfare. The gods lined up on one side, the demons on the other, and they wrapped Vasuki around the mountain like a massive tug-of-war rope. The ocean frothed and swirled as they pulled, the gods grinning like kids at a carnival, the demons snarling but playing along. The mountain spun, the waters churned, and treasures started popping up, gems, celestial cows, even a wish-granting tree. The gods cheered, Brahma scribbled notes for new creations, and Vishnu kept an eye on things, making sure the demons didn't cheat. But then, something went wrong. The ocean started to darken, bubbles turning black, and a stench like death filled the air. From the depths came hala hala, a poison so toxic it could burn through reality itself. The waves hissed, the air grew heavy, and the gods and demons froze, their smug grins wiped clean. Hala hala wasn't just any poison, it was the distilled darkness of the universe, all the pain and destruction bottled up in a thick, inky cloud that spread faster than wildfire. It seeped into the air, choking the gods, making their golden skin turn pale. The demons, usually tough as nails, started coughing, their eyes watering. The ocean itself seemed to scream, its waves turning to sludge, fish floating belly up. The gods panicked, dropping Vasuki, who hissed in annoyance as he slithered back to safety. Brahma's four faces were all yelling different things: run, hide, pray, anything to stop the poison. Indra clutched his thunderbolt, useless against this kind of threat, and even Vishnu looked worried, his blue hands tightening on his mace. The sages, watching from their ashrams, fell to their knees, chanting Shiva's name like a lifeline. They all knew there was only one god who could handle this mess. Up on Kailasa, Shiva felt the poison sting before the news even reached him. He was sitting on his tiger skin, deep in meditation, when a sharp pain cut through his calm, like a knife in his chest. His third eye twitched, sensing the chaos below. Parvati was nearby,
teaching Ganesha how to carve a wooden toy with his trunk. When she saw Shiva stir, "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft but urgent. Shiva didn't answer right away, just stood, his trident in hand, his eyes scanning the horizon. The crescent moon in his hair dimmed, as if it felt the poison too. Nandi lifted his head, snorting, and Vasuki, who just returned from the churning, coiled tighter around Shiva's neck, hissing about the disaster. Before Parvati could say more, a flock of Gandharva messengers swooped in, their wings flapping frantically, spilling the story of the poison and the gods' panic. Shiva's face stayed calm, but his eyes burned with purpose. "Stay here," he told Parvati, his voice low but firm. She nodded, trusting him, though her heart clenched with worry. Shiva descended to the ocean's edge, his steps shaking the earth, his ash-covered body catching the faint light of a dying sun. The scene was a nightmare. The ocean was a bubbling mess of black, the poison spreading like ink, choking everything in its path. The gods and demons were scattered, some cowering behind rocks, others trying to flee but collapsing as the poison burned their lungs. Brahma was babbling, his scrolls forgotten, while Vishnu stood his ground, shielding a few weaker gods with his power. Indra for once wasn't bragging, just staring at the poison like a kid who'd broken something big. Shiva didn't waste time with words. He stepped into the ocean, the waves parting around him, and faced the poison head-on. The gods watched, their breath caught, as Hala Hala swirled toward him, a dark cloud that seemed alive, hungry to destroy. Shiva didn't flinch. He raised his hands, his palms glowing with a light that pushed back the darkness. The poison hissed, like it knew it was up against something bigger. Shiva scooped it up, not with a cup or a bowl, but with his bare hands, the inky liquid pooling in his palms. The gods gasped, the demons muttered, and even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. The poison was heavy, burning, trying to eat through his skin, but Shiva's power was stronger. He brought his hands to his lips and drank, swallowing the poison like it was just another offering. The gods cried out, Brahma's voices overlapping in panic, Vishnu's calm cracking for a moment. Parvati, watching from Kailasa through her divine sight, felt her heart stop. Ganesha, beside her, clutched her hand, his trunk trembling. "Father?" he whispered, but Parvati couldn't answer, her eyes fixed on Shiva. The poison hit Shiva like a storm. His body shook, his ash-covered skin turning a sickly grey, as Hala Hala burned through him. His throat began to glow, a deep, unnatural blue, as the poison settled there, too potent to go further. Parvati, sensing the danger, appeared at his side in an instant, her sari fluttering in the toxic wind. She didn't hesitate. She pressed her hands to Shiva's throat, her own power surging, a golden light that stopped the poison from spreading. The gods watched, awestruck, as Parvati's touch held the darkness at bay, her love anchoring Shiva's strength. His shaking stopped, his eyes met hers, and a faint smile curved his lips, like he was saying, "I knew you'd have my back." The poison stayed in his throat, turning it a permanent shimmering blue, a mark of his sacrifice. Thus, he became Nilkanth, the blue-throated one, the god who bore the world's pain. The ocean cleared, the poison's darkness fading as Shiva's light burned it away. The waves sparkled again, fish swimming back to life, the air sweet once more. The gods let out a collective sigh, their golden halls ringing with relief. Brahma started scribbling again, muttering about how he'd write this into the cosmic records. Vishnu gave Shiva a nod, his smile back in place, like he'd never doubted him. Indra, still shaken, bowed low, his thunderbolt dangling forgotten. The demons who'd been ready to bolt, knelt too, their heads bowed, not out of fear but respect. Even they could see Shiva wasn't just the destroyer, he was the one who saved everything by taking the hit himself. The sages, far off in their ashrams, chanted louder, their hymns carrying the story of Nilkanth across the earth. Back on Kailasa, Shiva sat on his tiger skin, his throat still glowing blue, a reminder of what he'd done. Parvati sat beside him, her hand resting on his, her eyes soft but fierce. "You scared me," she said, her voice half teasing, half serious. Shiva chuckled, a low rumble that made Nandi perk up. "Had to be done," he said, his eyes meeting hers, full of that quiet love that held the universe together. Ganesha, who'd been pacing with worry, plopped down next to them, his trunk waving like a flag. "You're okay, right, father?" he asked, his big eyes searching. Shiva ruffled his head, careful not to bump his trunk. "I'm fine, kid," he said, and Ganesha grinned, grabbing another sweet like nothing had happened. Vasuki slithered back to his usual spot, hissing contentedly, and the crescent moon in Shiva's hair glowed brighter, like it was proud. The story of the poison spread fast, carried by travelers, sages, and the wind itself. Mortals began to worship Shiva as Nilkanth, building small shrines by rivers and mountains, offering milk and flowers to honor the god who drank death to save life. They painted his image, blue throat, trident, ash-smeared body, on cave walls and clay tablets, their songs telling of his sacrifice. The gods, too, never forgot. Brahma added a new chapter to his cosmic scrolls, Vishnu told the tale to his devotees, and even Indra, in his rare humble moments, admitted Shiva was the real deal. Parvati, though, saw more than the sacrifice. She saw the love behind it, the willingness to bear the world's pain so others wouldn't have to. That blue throat wasn't just a mark, it was a promise, a sign that Shiva's destruction was always in service of something greater, a cycle that turned death into life, poison into salvation. The teachings of the lingam. All the world was changing, growing louder and busier, as mortal civilizations sprouted like wildflowers across the plains and rivers. Villages turned into towns, towns into cities, and people started looking for meaning beyond their daily grind. Up on Mount Kailasa, Shiva watched it all with his usual calm, his ash-smeared body still as the snow around him, his matted hair crowned with the crescent moon. Parvati was by his side, her laughter softening the mountain's chill, while Ganesha scampered about, his elephant trunk waving as he chased Vasuki, who hissed in mock annoyance. Nandi dozed nearby, snorting contentedly, his massive head resting on a rock. The gods, lounging in their golden palaces, were pleased with the world's progress, but they noticed something new. Mortals were reaching out, searching for the divine, and they were drawn to Shiva, not just as the destroyer, but as something deeper, something they couldn't quite name. The time had come for Shiva to connect with them, not as a distant god, but as a presence they could feel, and he chose a form that would become his most enduring symbol, the lingam. Down on earth, people were starting to build shrines, simple at first, just piles of stones by rivers or under banyan trees. They'd heard the stories of Shiva, the cosmic dancer, the blue-throated savior, the husband of Parvati, the father of Ganesha, but they didn't always picture him as a man with a trident and ash. To them he was more than a figure, he was a force, a mystery that held the universe together. The sages, those wise old folks with beards long enough to trip over, were the first to sense it. They'd sit in their ashrams, meditating by flickering oil lamps, and feel Shiva's presence, not as a voice or a vision, but as a hum, a vibration that ran through the earth and sky. They wanted a way to honor that feeling, something tangible but not human, something that captured his infinite nature. That's when Shiva, in his quiet way, gave them the lingam. The lingam wasn't some grand statue or golden idol. It was simple, a smooth, upright stone, sometimes rounded, sometimes rough, set in a circular base that represented the yoni, the feminine energy of Shakti. It wasn't flashy, but it didn't need to be. The lingam was formless, yet full of meaning, a symbol of Shiva's essence, creation and destruction, beginning and end all wrapped into one. The first lingams appeared in sacred places, caves, riverbanks, mountaintops, where the earth itself seemed to pulse with his power. One of the earliest was in a cave in Amarnath, high in the Himalayas, where ice formed a natural lingam, glistening under the dim light.
Another was by the sea in Ramswaram, where the waves kissed a stone pillar, smoothing it over centuries. Mortals didn't carve these at first. They found them as if the earth itself was offering them up to honor Shiva. The sages were the first to understand the lingam's meaning. They'd sit around it, their eyes half closed, chanting Shiva's name in low rhythmic tones. They saw it as a bridge between the mortal and the divine, a way to touch the infinite without losing themselves in it. The lingam wasn't just a rock, it was Shiva himself, stripped of form, pure and eternal. People started coming, not just sages but farmers, weavers, mothers, all drawn to these stones that seemed to hum with life. They'd pour milk over the lingam, the white liquid pooling in the yoni, a symbol of nourishment and renewal. They'd offer flowers, jasmine, marigold, hibiscus, their petals bright against the stone. They didn't always know why they did it. It just felt right, like the lingam was listening, holding their prayers in its silence. Shiva didn't show up in person to explain it. That wasn't his style. He taught through the lingam's quiet presence, letting people figure it out for themselves. Up on Kailasa, he'd watch, his third eye glowing faintly, a faint smile on his lips as Parvati leaned against him. "They're starting to get it," she'd say, her voice warm with pride. Shiva would nod, his hand resting on his trident, knowing the lingam was more than a symbol. It was a lesson. It told mortals that everything was connected, that creation and destruction were two sides of the same coin. The lingam's simplicity was its power. It didn't need eyes or a face to speak. It just was, like Shiva himself, eternal and unchanging in a world that never stopped moving. The gods, of course, couldn't resist sticking their noses in. Brahma, always curious, floated down to earth to see the lingams for himself. He'd hover around a shrine, his four faces peering at the stone, muttering about how it was a brilliant idea, though he'd never admit it was better than his own creations. Vishnu, ever the supporter, would visit in his quiet way, leaving a lotus flower at a lingam, before slipping back to his celestial couch. Indra, predictably, was a bit miffed. He liked his thunderbolt-wielding statues better, but even he had to admit the lingam had a certain pull. The lesser gods, like Agni and Vayu, started showing up at shrines, drawn by the devotion of the mortals. They'd whisper to each other, "Shiva's onto something here," and the air would hum with their approval. The mortals, though, were the ones who really brought the lingam to life. In a village by the Ganga, a farmer named Vimal built a small shrine under a banyan tree, using a smooth river stone he'd found while ploughing his fields. He didn't know much about gods or rituals, but he felt something when he touched the stone, like it was alive. Every morning, he'd pour a cup of milk over it, whispering thanks for his crops, his family, his life. His neighbors noticed, and soon they were joining him, bringing their own offerings, rice, flowers, even a few coins. The shrine grew, the stone surrounded by a ring of petals, the air thick with the scent of sandalwood. Vimal didn't call it worship, he just called it respect, a way to say thank you to the force that kept the world turning. In another town, a weaver named Lakshmi found a lingam in a forest clearing, a tall black stone that seemed to glow under the moonlight. She was a widow, her life hard and lonely, but when she sat by the lingam, she felt peace, like someone was listening. She'd bring a single marigold each day, placing it at the base, and talk to the stone about her worries, her aching hands, her empty home, her hopes for something better. One day, a sage passing through saw her and sat beside her, explaining that the lingam was Shiva, the one who destroyed to create, who burned away pain to make room for hope. Lakshmi didn't fully get it, but she felt it, and her daily visits became a ritual, her heart lighter each time she left. The lingam's teachings spread like wildfire, carried by travelers, traders, and wandering ascetics. In the south, by the Kaveri River, a temple grew around a lingam said to have appeared in a dream to a local king. In the north, in a cave near Kedarnath, pilgrims braved snow and ice to pray at a lingam that seemed to pulse with warmth.
Each shrine was different, but the feeling was the same, a connection to something bigger, something that didn't judge or demand but simply was. People started calling Shiva, Shiva Linga, the one who embodied the lingam, and his name became a chant that echoed from mountains to seas. The sages wrote hymns, their words weaving stories of the lingam's power, how it held the cycle of life and death in its simple form. Parvati loved the lingams, seeing them as a bridge between her and Shiva's worlds. She'd visit them sometimes, disguised as a village woman, her sari plain, but her eyes giving her away. She'd pour milk over a lingam, her hands steady, and smile at the mortals who didn't recognize her. Ganesha tagged along once, his trunk sneaking extra sweets from the offerings, earning a playful swat from his mother. Behave, she'd whisper, but her laugh gave her away. Shiva, watching from Kailasa, felt their devotion, not as pride but as a quiet hum in his heart. He didn't need their worship, but he understood it, their need to touch the divine, to make sense of a world that was always changing. The lingam was his gift to them, a way to say, I'm here, even when you can't see me. The teachings of the lingam weren't just about worship, they were about letting go. The sages, sitting around their fires, started to understand it deeper. The lingam wasn't just Shiva, it was the truth of existence. Everything was temporary, from the mightiest king to the smallest blade of grass. The lingam taught that to destroy was to clear space for something new, to burn away ego and illusion, to find the eternal. A sage named Narada, known for his wandering and his knack for stirring things up, took this to heart. He'd travel from village to village, sitting by lingams, telling stories of Shiva's dance, his blue throat, his love for Parvati. The lingam is Shiva's heart, he'd say, his voice carrying over the crackle of the fire. It's where you let go of what holds you back, and find what's real. Mortals took the lesson in their own way. A merchant in a bustling city, weighed down by greed, sat by a lingam one night, pouring milk and whispering his fears. He left his gold coins at the shrine, not as an offering, but as a release, and walked away lighter, his heart clearer. A mother, grieving a lost child, found a lingam by a river and cried into its stone, feeling her pain ease, not gone but shared. The lingam didn't speak, didn't move, but it listened, and that was enough. Temples began to rise, some simple, some grand, each housing a lingam that drew crowds from far and wide. The rituals grew, milk, water, bilva leaves, all offered with chants that made the air vibrate. The lingam became a beacon, a place where mortals could touch the divine and find peace in the cycle of life. Up on Kailasa, Shiva sat with Parvati, his trident resting against a rock, his blue throat glowing faintly. Ganesha was nearby, carving a new toy with his trunk, giggling when Vasuki tried to steal it. Parvati leaned against Shiva, her hand on his, her eyes soft. They're learning, she said, nodding toward the world below. Shiva's smile was faint but real. They're trying, he replied, his voice a low rumble. The lingam wasn't just a stone, it was his way of being with them, of teaching them that destruction wasn't the end, but the start of something new. The universe kept turning, and the lingam stood as its heart, a silent guide for anyone willing to listen, a reminder that Shiva was always there, in every beginning, every end, and every moment in between.
The eternal cycle. The world had grown older, its rivers deeper, its mountains worn smoother by time, but Shiva remained unchanged on Mount Kailasa, his ash-smeared body, a constant against the shifting ages. Parvati sat beside him, her laughter a melody that warmed the snowy peaks, while Ganesha, now a beloved figure among mortals, scampered about, his elephant trunk waving as he teased Vasuki, who hissed playfully in return. Nandi the bull lounged nearby, his massive head resting on a rock, snorting contentedly as if he knew the universe was in good hands. The crescent moon in Shiva's matted hair glowed softly, casting a silver light that danced on the snow, and his trident leaned against a boulder, its prongs glinting with the promise of power. Down below, civilizations rose and fell, their temples and cities dotting the earth like stars, each one whispering Shiva's name in chants and prayers. The gods, in their golden palaces, watched with a mix of awe and relief, knowing Shiva's presence kept the cosmic wheel turning. Yet, as the ages rolled on, Shiva's role as the destroyer took on a deeper meaning, one that mortals and gods alike were beginning to grasp. A cycle that wasn't about endings but about beginnings born from them. Shiva's story wasn't just a collection of battles and loves, it was the heartbeat of the universe itself. He was the ascetic who sat in silence, his mind holding the cosmos together. He was the dancer, Nataraja, whose Tandava spun stars into being and crumbled them to dust. He was the lover who cherished Parvati, their bond a balance that steadied the heavens. He was the father who blessed Ganesha, turning a moment of destruction into a new kind of wisdom. His blue throat, Neelkanth, was a mark of sacrifice, a reminder that he bore the world's pain so others wouldn't have to. And the lingam, that simple stone, was his gift to mortals, a way to touch the divine without losing themselves in its vastness. Shiva was all these things and more, a god who didn't just destroy but cleared the way for renewal, like a forest fire, making room for new growth. Down on earth, mortals felt Shiva's presence in every corner of their lives. In the bustling cities along the Ganga, where merchants haggled and children played, temples rose with lingams at their hearts, their stone surfaces smoothed by countless offerings of milk and flowers. A fisherman named Arjun, his hands rough from years of casting nets, would pause at a riverside shrine each dawn, pouring water over a lingam and whispering thanks for a good catch. He didn't know the stories of Andahaka or the poison, but he felt Shiva in the river's flow, in the way the water carried both life and loss. In a village nestled in the hills, a potter named Maya would shape clay into small lingams, her fingers steady as she hummed Shiva's name, her heart lighter with each one she made. She'd give them to travelers, who carried them to distant lands, spreading Shiva's quiet wisdom. The sages, those old souls with eyes that saw beyond the world, understood Shiva's cycle better than most. They'd sit in their ashrams, their beards trailing like clouds, and teach that Shiva's destruction wasn't about chaos but about truth. A sage named Veda, known for his gentle voice and sharp mind, would gather his students under a banyan tree, a lingam at its roots, and tell them stories of Shiva's dance. He destroys the ego, Veda would say, his hands tracing the air like he could see the Tandava. He burns away what blinds us so we can see what's real. His students, young and eager, would listen, their eyes wide, feeling the weight of Shiva's power in the sage's words. They'd leave the ashram, carrying his teachings, chanting Om Namah Shiva as they walked, their voices blending with the wind. Shiva's presence wasn't just in temples or ashrams, it was in the world itself, the rivers, the mountains, the cycles of life. The Ganga, said to flow from Shiva's hair, was a lifeline for millions, its waters carrying his blessings to fields and villages. Farmers would dip their hands in its currents, offering a silent prayer to the god who gave them water to grow their crops. In the forests where tigers prowled and birds sang, hermits would meditate by lingams they'd found, not made, feeling Shiva in the rustle of leaves and the pulse of the earth. Even in the cities where life was loud and chaotic, people would pause at small shrines, lighting lamps and offering bilva leaves, their hearts finding a moment of peace in Shiva's silence. He was everywhere, not as a king demanding worship, but as a presence that reminded them to let go, to trust the cycle. Up on Kailasa, Shiva and Parvati watched the world turn, their love a quiet anchor. Parvati would lean against him, her sari catching the moonlight, and tease him about his wild ways. "You're not as scary as they think," she'd say, her eyes twinkling. Shiva would chuckle, a low rumble that made Nandi perk up. "They need something to fear," he'd reply, his third eye glowing faintly, a reminder of the fire within. Ganesha, always nearby, would pipe up with a grin, his trunk waving as he munched on a sweet.
"They love you, father," he'd say, crumbs flying, "even when you're all serious and ashy." Shiva would ruffle his son's head, careful not to bump his trunk, and the family would laugh, their joy echoing through the peaks. Vasuki would slither closer, hissing happily, while the crescent moon glowed brighter, like it was in on the joke. The gods too felt Shiva's influence in their golden halls. Brahma, for all his scheming, would visit Kailasa sometimes, his four faces quieter now, respecting Shiva's role in the cosmic dance. He'd leave scrolls of new worlds at Shiva's feet, not asking for approval, but knowing they'd need his touch to complete their cycle. Vishnu, ever the friend, would show up with a lotus flower, his blue skin catching the snow's light, and share a silent moment with Shiva, their bond deeper than words. Even Indra, who still had a chip on his shoulder, would bow when he passed a lingam, his thunderbolt tucked away. The lesser gods, Agni, Vayu, the whole crew would gather at shrines, their voices joining the mortal chants, honoring the destroyer who made their creation possible. Shiva's role as the destroyer wasn't just about big, dramatic moments like battles or cosmic poisons. It was in the small things too, the way a flower wilted to make room for a new bloom, the way a river carved a new path through stone. In a village by the Yamuna, a woman named Radha, old and frail, sat by a lingam each evening, her hands trembling as she poured milk. She'd lost her husband, her children, but the lingam gave her peace, a reminder that endings were part of something bigger. Shiva takes, but he gives too, she'd whisper, her voice soft as the dusk. Her neighbors, seeing her calm, started coming to the shrine, their own worries easing as they chanted his name. The lingam wasn't just a stone, it was a mirror showing them that loss was just a step toward renewal. The cycle wasn't always easy to accept. In a city where traders grew rich and temples grew grand, a merchant named Kashiva learned it the hard way. He'd built a fortune, his house stuffed with gold, but his heart was heavy with greed. One night, he sat by a lingam, his hands empty, his mind a mess. He poured water over the stone, not sure why, and felt something shift, like the weight of his wealth was less important than the quiet he found there. He started giving away his gold, not all at once, but slowly, to those who needed it. The lingam didn't speak, but it taught him to let go, to destroy his attachment to things that didn't last. Kashiva's story spread, and soon others followed, their offerings not just milk or flowers, but the burdens they carried, left at Shiva's feet. Shiva's dance, the Tandava, was still the heart of it all. Mortals didn't see it, not like the gods did in Chidambaram, but they felt its rhythm. In temples, priests would dance, their steps mimicking Shiva's, their bells jingling like his damaru. In villages, storytellers would spin tales of Nataraja, his flames swirling, his drum beating the pulse of time. Children would listen, wide-eyed, imagining the god who danced the world into being, and out again. Artists carved his image, trident raised, hair wild, 1 foot lifted in mid-step, on temple walls, their chisels guided by a love for the destroyer, who was also the creator. The dance wasn't just a story, it was a truth, a reminder that everything moved in cycles, that destruction was just the prelude to something new. The Ganga carried Shiva's essence most of all. They said it flowed from his hair, a gift to the earth. When a sage begged him to release it, farmers along its banks would kneel in its waters, their hands cupped, thanking Shiva for the fields that fed their families. Pilgrims would travel miles, their feet blistered, to bathe in its currents, believing it washed away their sins. The Ganga wasn't just a river, it was Shiva's blessing, a liquid thread that tied the mortal world to the divine. In Varanasi, where the river curved like a crescent moon, lingams lined the ghats, their stones worn smooth by countless hands. People would sit there chanting Om Namah Shivaya, their voices blending with the water's flow, feeling Shiva in every ripple. Up on Kailasa, Shiva watched it all, his third eye half open, his heart steady. Parvati would sit with him, her hand in his, her eyes soft as she looked out at the world. "They're learning," she'd say, her voice warm. Shiva would nod, his smile faint, but real. "They're trying," he'd reply, his Damaru resting in his lap, its beat silent but always ready. Ganesha would chime in, his trunk waving, "They love you, Father, even the ones who don't get it." Shiva would laugh, a sound that made the snow tremble and ruffle Ganesha's head. Vasuki would hiss, Nandi would snort, and the family would sit together, their love a quiet anchor for the cosmos. The gods watching from above would smile, knowing Shiva's cycle kept everything in motion. The eternal cycle wasn't just a story, it was life itself. Shiva's trident pierced ignorance, his third eye burned falsehood, and his dance kept the universe spinning. Temples echoed with his name, from the icy caves of Amarnath to the sunlit shores of Rameswaram. Mortals built shrines, not out of fear but love, their offerings a way to say, "We see you." The cycle turned, empires rose and fell, but Shiva remained, his drum beating softly, ready to dance when the world needed to be unmade and reborn. He was the destroyer, yes, but also the promise of new dawns, the God who taught that to let go was to embrace the eternal. And as the ages rolled on, Shiva watched, his heart steady, his family by his side, guiding the universe toward its next beginning with every step of his cosmic dance.